is being recorded.
A reminder to add your name and company affiliation to the attendee list in the minutes. And the first thing we have scheduled today is a lightning talk by Marius about JITServer.
Hello everyone, I'm ready.
Okay.
So,
Hello.
Might as well get started.
Okay, I'll try to share content. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'll get started then. So in this lightning talk, I'm going to give you an update on the JITServer project. And as you can see in the title, there has been a change in nomenclature. So JIT as a service has become JITServer now. First of all, a brief refresher. So the goal of JITServer is to eliminate the bad effects from JIT compilation by offloading it to an independent remote process. And ideally, that remote process is actually a service running in the cloud. For completeness, I have added on this slide the benefits that we expect to reap from JITServer. But because I mentioned them with other occasions, I'm going to skip over this slide. So where are we today? The code is now fully ported from the JIT as a service branch to the master branch, and the JIT as a service branch is now stale, and it's kept only for referring to old PRs. The feature is available for all three major Linux architectures, X, P, and Z, but it needs to be compiled in. What I mean by that is that the code is protected by if-def statements, and in order to activate those statements, we need to provide the enable JITServer option to the configure step. The technology has two dependencies. One is on a protobuf library, which needs to be present at compile time. We don't need it at runtime because we compile statically. And we also depend on OpenSSL. We need OpenSSL headers at compile time. And if you're actually using encryption, you need OpenSSL DLL at runtime. If you want just to use the technology and you are not interested in building it, you can fetch OpenJ9 version 0.18.1 from Adopt OpenJDK, and this one has the JITServer code embedded. But I should mention that this is true only for Linux x86-64, Java 8, and Java 11. P and Z will come shortly. Also, in the future, we'll have nightly builds from Adopt OpenJDK with the JITServer code embedded for X-Linux, P-Linux, and Z-Linux. So if you want to use it, you have to be aware of the options and how to start it. Again, there have been some changes in this area. To start the JITServer, you no longer have to use a Java command line option. You have to use the launcher, which is called JITServer. Also for the client, you use the Java command line option, but now the option has changed. It's XX plus use JITServer. Of course, you can specify additional options. You can specify, for instance, the JITServer port, the JITServer address, or the timeout. The timeout can be done both for the client and the server. If you plan to use encryption, you have to specify at the server both the private key and the certificate, while at the client, you only need the certificate. So let's look into some performance numbers. On this chart, I'm looking at startup of Acme Air. So Acme Air is a Java EE application that runs on top of Liberty application server. And on this graph, I have two different configurations. On the left is what I call a resource-constrained environment, where Docker containers have only one CPU at their disposal, and the memory is limited to 150 megabytes. On the right, I have a more generous configuration with 4 PE and half a gigabyte. If you look at the bar in blue, which is the normalized startup time for JITServer, we see that in the resource-constrained environment, JITServer manages to improve startup time by 6%. But if we look at the 4P configuration, JITServer actually degrades startup time by 12%. So this is due to network latency. So with JITServer, we have actually two factors, two forces that pull into different directions. So on one hand, JITServer frees CPU cycles at the client because compilations are performed elsewhere. But on the other hand, compilations take longer because they're affected by network latency. I should mention that during one compilation, on average, there are about 100 messages being exchanged between a server and the client. And therefore, the network latency indirectly affects world clock time for a single compilation. So depending on which of these two factors is more important, we are going to experience either a win or a loss. For instance, if free CPU is available, then the advantage of JITServer is diminished and the latency problem becomes the dominant factor. In order to address the latency problem, we came up with a heuristic which says that if a compilation is cheap, it should be performed locally rather than sending it to the remote server. So what is a cheap compilation? In this simple heuristics, we deem compilations performed at cold or no optimization levels to be cheap. The good news is that when in the 4P configuration, this heuristic is able to shrink the regression from 12% to 6%. The bad news is that the advantage of the JITServer in the resource-constrained environment is also reduced from 6% to just 3%. But we think that we could amend this technology to determine in which environment it is running and get the best of both worlds. Let's look at some throughput numbers. Okay, so this slide shows the throughput for Acme Air when load is applied to the system. On top, I have the throughput in a resource-constrained environment. And as you can see, JITServer is able to do a very good job at improving ramp-up time, especially if you are using a cold run, a cold that has no shared class caches that has been primed. This is the graph on the left. But even with a primed shared class cache, the graph on the right, there is still a good advantage from JITServer. Now, if we concentrate bottom row, here is the 4P configuration, and the advantage of JITServer has been reduced significantly. This is because there is enough CPU to deal with those compilations. But this is not the case with the next application, which is DayTrader 7. So the difference between these two applications is that DayTrader 7 has many more classes and definitely needs to compile many more methods. Therefore, if you look at the resource-constrained environment, the advantage of JITServer is even bigger than for Acme Air. And if we look at the bottom row, even in this 4P configuration, the JITServer is able to pull ahead. It takes OpenJ9 about 200 seconds to catch up with the performance of JITServer. So the takeaway from these three slides is that JITServer is able to improve performance when there are many methods that need to be compiled, when you don't have the CPU resources to compile those methods, and when the network latency is small. Another advantage of JITServer is that it allows you to increase the density of applications. So let's look at the graph on the left. This is something that you've seen before, and it illustrates the fact that JIT compilation produces footprint spikes. However, the important thing to notice is that these footprint spikes actually cause an increase in the peak memory consumption, which means that you are forced to use a container that is bigger than needed. I've run some experiments with DayTrader 7 and determined that the smallest container I could use to run successfully is about 310 megabytes if I'm using the JITServer technology, and 400 megabytes, so definitely larger, if I'm not using the JITServer technology. I would venture to say that in practice, customers or users are likely to over-provision when OpenJ9 is used, because one compilation thread is allowed to use up to 256 megabytes. And we routinely see some of the compilations hitting or even trying to exceed this mark. Now, of course, compilation is non-deterministic, and therefore, just because you didn't happen to see such a compilation in 1 or 2 runs, it doesn't mean that in future it doesn't happen. It cannot happen. So to be fair, I have to add this 256 megabyte on top of the 300 megabyte that JITServer needs at steady state. And over, I would say that JITServer is improved to reduce the size of the container by about 40%. And this reduction in container size means that we can reduce the operational cost by the same amount, 40%. So where do we want to take this next? I think this year we should realize the full potential of the JITServer. And I've listed here 3 bullets, 3 avenues that we want to pursue. We also want to address the interoperability between Java 8 and Java 11. So right now, the client and the server need to be at the same Java level, but we plan to remove that restriction. We have a cache project that is looking into caching compiled code at JITServer in order to address the latency issue, and also looking at machine learning techniques to send those compiled methods even before the client asks for them. And we also want to look into cross-compilation aspects, for instance, compiling on x86 for Z machines that are more rare and more expensive. So that's my end of the talk. I haven't covered the delivery mechanism. I think that should be the subject of another presentation. So basically, we plan to combine this with OpenShift. So we'll put JITServer technology into Red Hat OpenShift. But again, that will be the subject of another presentation. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be ready to take them.
Thanks, Marius. This is exciting. I look forward to seeing the future improvements.
Thank you.
So I'm going to try to share my screen now so we can see the agenda. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so the next thing in the list is updates from recent conferences or user engagements. Does anyone have anything under that category? If not, I'll bring up the user raised issues. So we have a feature request to add exception messages to xdump stack output. Something unexpected bytecode in Thunk architecture. I think I'll just add that to a milestone. The feature request. Yeah.
Stupid question. What's a Thunk Thunk archetype? Sorry. I thought you said Thunk architecture. I didn't understand.
I may have. Sorry about that.
It's fine. It's fine.
I think I'm going to add this to the backlog. Oops. This one, I don't think we've... Somebody's claiming that OpenJ9 is ignoring -x no AOT, but they haven't provided any more details. If I try a very simple test on the command line, the version output claims that AOT is... So I didn't try anything more stressful than that. It'd be nice if the user would come back to us, so I'll just leave that one for now until we get more input. Segmentation error. I think this one was being worked. So it's already in a milestone. Crash after creating large objects. Raised by myself. I'll just add that to the next milestone. This one I've already added to a milestone. Class unloading threshold default is too high. Well, I'll stick it in the milestone. We'll see how it goes. Might be moving some of these things forward because the focus of our next milestone is Java 14. And I think that's it for the new issues raised in the last week. There's been quite a few. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new ones. That's pretty high. Not sure why phantom references being enqueued is listed in the minutes. I know there's been some ongoing work on it. It's in our backlog, but there is some ongoing work, so we'll just leave it there. Request for a Windows JDK 11 build at Adopt.
Yeah, so I stuck that in. That arrived this morning. I've responded with a yes, you're quite right. It's not supported. Pointed the requester at the list of supported platforms at Eclipse OpenJ9 and pointed out that any such build would have to start with the Eclipse OpenJ9 project supporting it. So I put the link in there in case any of you would like to. And suggested that the request should really be made here first in the OpenJ9 GitHub.
So I believe this has come up before, and the problem here is that OpenJDK doesn't support it. I don't think there's any problem on the OpenJ9 side because we've got the same code base for Java 8 and Java 11. So
yes, so we are building a hotspot Win32 at Adopt, but not OpenJ9 at the moment. So.
Okay, well, I'm going to say no because this has come up before, and Dan said no because officially JDK doesn't support it. So if we start putting out builds and people start using it and something goes wrong, we'll expect it to be fixed. And since OpenJDK doesn't support it, there's nobody who would necessarily be looking at it. But we can leave it in the agenda and ask Dan next week. I assume he'll be back on the call next week and see if he's changed his mind.
Yeah, so again, in that issue, I have asked the raiser what his use case is, why he really needs this.
Okay, sounds good.
No response yet, though.
Yeah. Has there been any updates to the download trends?
So I've updated them. The trends are continuing in the direction they did last week. So,
okay. Let's just move on then.
Yeah.
So we want to advertise our milestone builds. So we'll be looking to do that when we create one for Java 14, although remains to be seen. There's a number of Java 14 features that need to be delivered. And I don't know if we're going to make the February 9th code split deadline for that. So the first milestone might be missing a number of Java 14 features. We'll have to play it by ear. So the hot issue lately is the notarization of the Mac builds. I know Keith has been working hard to get Java 11 and Java 8 working for OpenJ9. I think 11 is ready to go, but he's still working on 8 this morning. He was in 8, I guess there's no configure option to be able to set it up. So he's been working on adding that part of it. I don't know how easy it will be for us to test 8. We might just deliver the code and cross our fingers and let Adopt do the testing. Does anybody have any updates on that? What's happening at Adopt?
So I was trying to chase what George was doing this morning and didn't get any update, I don't think. But my thought was he was concentrating on 11. My question was, what was happening with 8? Stuart, you have any more info? You're on mute, Stuart.
So I muted Stuart earlier. I will unmute him just in case we can figure out how to do that.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I'm not aware of any particularly more than Andrew has said. We had the options in to enable the macOS code signing option on JDK 8 and 13 builds, and we backed out that option. I'm not aware of any plans to put it back in for now. I think 11 was the priority at the moment. So yeah, I don't know what the update, if there's any specific work on 8 and 13 at the moment. There isn't.
So as far as I know, the OpenJ9 part for 11 is ready to go. So I think it could be merged today, but I'll have to check with Keith. So I assume there's nothing more to do for the 0.18 release. It's been delivered to 0.18.1.
Yes, correct.
So we'll skip over all that. I don't know that we need to do anything more in the release retrospective.
No, we've had one adopt as well, and there's a few potential action items come out of that that are being worked, similar to what we said here.
Maybe one thing we should discuss. Do we need to have a 0.18.2 release of OpenJ9, even though there's no OpenJ9 changes? But if I assume we're going to respin Java 11, at least for Mac, to add the notarization, do we want to have a 0.18.2 so we have a different file name?
So adopt have what they call a build suffix, so that puts a dot suffix onto from the OpenJ9 build's point of view on the left-hand side of the OpenJDK version on the left and the OpenJ9 on the right. So there's no need to produce a new OpenJ9 release, and it will be named differently.
Perfect. I like that answer. Okay, so Java 14, as I mentioned, code split on February 9th. There are a number of OpenJ9 features in progress for Java 14. I'm not sure if they're going to meet the February 9th date or not, so that remains to be seen. But we will do the code split on schedule no matter what the status, and then we'll immediately do milestone 1 builds to make sure everything's going smoothly at adopt. Whether or not we publish those builds remains to be seen. But there will be a milestone 2, and if necessary, we'll add a milestone 3 later. So we can look forward to that starting February 9th. So we did provide Z-Linux and P-Linux large heap packages at adopt. I think we were waiting for a website update.
I think the website update's there now, so it should be okay.
Excellent. Next is the adopt update. Does anyone have an update there?
Not much to say, I don't think, than what we've already said. Stuart's been setting up some more AIX boxes that should increase our capacity there. There's some work being going to do what will be JDK 15 pipeline as we start to produce the JDK 14 release for real. Apart from that, we're in a kind of lull after just getting the January releases out. And of course the notarization, which we've just mentioned.
So what is happening with JDK 14 nightly builds?
So I think Severin, the guy from Red Hat, who's on the Adopt Open JDK TSC, has been putting that in place. So I think he's got everything set up to run those now, but he isn't running. We're not running testing against them yet. And I think he missed AIX because he doesn't do AIX. But that was a Severin thing. I think we can add that in fairly easily.
Okay. Does anyone have anything for Omar? Next up is machines. I'm not sure if is Adam on the call. Do you have anything for machines?
Sure. Sorry, I was asleep paying attention. So we lost all our AX machines yesterday. Not good.
All our AX build machines.
Yes, sorry, build machines. So we were able to restore number 1. So the short story is we have 1 compile and 3 test at the moment. There's more details there. Working on getting those back as soon as possible, but it's going to take some time to set them up.
Any idea how much time?
From what I understand, the playbook isn't the greatest, so it's probably at least a day per machine.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad.
Okay, 6 days per machine.
6 days per machine.
Yeah,
Pretty bad.
Go.
If you need a hand with that, give me a shout because I've been playing with AIX and trying to
Yeah, I saw
dealing
you
with a bunch of issues on it. Yeah, me and Sedge
for
have been
doing
working on
it,
it over the
so
last- yeah.
redirect Joe your way.
Yeah, it's fine.
There is an intermittent issue with the new, seems to be with the new Z15 pulling from Artifactory, so we have issue open for that, but we're investigating.
Out of interest, are you getting that issue on all of the machines or just some of them?
I think it's all of them, but it's very intermittent. It's only happened 3 or 4 times from what I saw. Let's peek and add details there. So the only thing we've done so far is added some option on the test side to have verbose curl output rather than silent curl output. So it hasn't happened since that change went in, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think Jenkins got restarted last night, so we didn't get proper builds. It seemed to happen pretty early, like 1:30 a.m. So
I don't expect it to be anything related to Z15, but it wasn't happening before on the Z14, so sort of coincidental.
speaking of Jenkins being restarted, there was a note from Eclipse overnight in our issue that we have open about Jenkins stability, and they're talking about possibly giving us more memory and more CPU for our Jenkins server, so that might help our restart issues. Right. And if it doesn't, maybe we'll get some more attention on why the restarts are happening.
Yeah, they claim 21 restarts in the past 6 to 9 days. I would have expected a lot higher than that.
Yeah, so I haven't been keeping track. But
from what I thought, it was like every day or several times a day.
It's not every day, but it seems every couple days. It's not necessarily obvious why. Sometimes it seems to happen when there is a big load, like last night, but other times there's no obvious reason, but maybe somebody started a lot of PR testing. It's hard to tell.
Right. Okay. I made a note in there about that. In terms of Artifactory, we're getting close to 100%. I fixed a bug with the cleanup script. Still pretty high. Not sure if it's completely related to adding JDK 14 or if there's something else going on, but if we get any closer to full, then we're going to have to spend some more time investigating that.
It kind of seems like either for JDK 14, we haven't reached our 50 days yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. So I did write a job to clean up, to allow you to clean up the old versions, and that appears to have worked, but it didn't appear to get as much space recovered as what I would have thought. So
We did some cleanup of the test material, and that recovered some space. I thought we did cleanup of JDK 13 builds, and that's nothing.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to look at that again.
So maybe that didn't really work.
Okay. Also on the Artifactory thread, I have issues open to start putting one at UNB. I'll create a machine, set up Artifactory, and there'll be a bunch of pipeline changes to make it work, because I think the solution we're going for is to do a double push, but then pass the test pipelines the UNB link instead of the Artifactory link. The problem being is that UNB is behind a firewall, so we just use that one, then developers wouldn't be able to hold the artifacts.
Right.
So I think that's the best way to do it at the moment. We'll see how much pipeline code is involved in order to do that. Also means we shouldn't need too much space there, because it should only need to hold live builds, basically.
Sorry, what was that? We don't need to do what?
We shouldn't have to have too much space there, because it should only need to hold live builds. So once the build is done, we shouldn't need that artifact anymore.
Right, okay.
Because it'll also be pushed outside.
Yep. Okay, we'll look forward to that.
From what I recall, it's not an issue of pushing, it's usually just when we're trying to pull 20 things at once down into a UNB.
Yeah, and I don't think that problem actively occurs, because the builds have been split up to the point where we're not ever trying to run too many builds at the same time, but maybe once this is done, we'll get better speeds in getting our JVMs to start our tests, and
Right.
We won't have to split up our builds like we're doing right now.
Right. Yeah, it should make the test pulls lightning fast, so hopefully that helps. I think that's all for me, unless there's more questions.
Thank you. So just to restate the problem with AIX, we only have one build machine. So if you're running PR testing for AIX, be aware that all the builds are going to be serialized. The testing can run in parallel because we have more test machines, but if 5 people launch a build, they're going to happen one after each other. So there are any updates on the website?
I added a comment in there, Peter, just to say that, homepage and about pages are developed, but we've still got some work to do to populate that with the content, and I'm going to be reaching out to the project leads for some direction there so that we can avoid some rework. Meanwhile, our web developers will start working on the about and performance pages. So I reckon probably next week is too early to do a show on this call, but maybe the week after. So I'll talk to you or Dan about getting a slot on the agenda at the right time.
Okay, well, I'll just leave it. I won't put anything in right now, and then next week, if you think you're ready for the following week, we can add something.
Okay, thanks.
Did anybody have any other business? Thanks, everyone.